Good evening, dear viewers. Tonight, we journey not to the thunderous roar of the Colosseum's crowds, nor to the clash of sword against shield, but to the quiet moments that filled a gladiator's days, the hours between spectacle and survival, where ordinary men lived extraordinarily complicated lives. But before we begin, please like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you do not miss any relaxing and sleep-inducing content when they drop on this channel. Now, I need you to relax. Let your shoulders drop. Inhale deeply and slowly. Hold your breath for at least 3 seconds. Exhale slowly. Now that you are relaxed, let us begin the journey into the private world of gladiators in the Roman era. Picture, if you will, the morning after a day of games. The arena sand has been raked clean, the bloodstains covered with fresh earth. The crowds have returned to their homes, their voices now distant echoes. But for those who fought and survived, the day is just beginning anew. The life of a gladiator was not, contrary to popular imagination, a constant dance with death. Death, certainly, was a frequent visitor to their world, but between his visits, there were meals to be eaten, muscles to be stretched, friendships to be carefully navigated, and the peculiar burden of fame to be carried. Tonight, we shall walk through their daily routines with the unhurried pace they themselves knew so well. For time, you see, moved differently in the gladiator schools. Each day stretched long when you might not see another, and yet passed quickly when filled with the endless repetition of preparation. So, settle in, dear listeners, as we explore not the glory of the arena, but the gentle rhythms of survival. The breakfast conversations, the afternoon naps, the evening worries that occupied minds that might, tomorrow, be forever stilled. Chapter 1: The Rhythm of Dawn. Dawn in a gladiator school arrived not with fanfare, but with the soft shuffle of sandaled feet and the quiet clearing of throats. The men who lived here had learned to wake gently. Sudden movements, after all, could trigger reflexes better saved for the arena. Gaius Maximus, though his friends simply called him Max, had been fighting in the arena for 7 years. This morning, like every morning for the past 2,555 days, he folded his blanket with the same careful precision he brought to maintaining his equipment. The dormitories of gladiator schools were not, despite what Hollywood might suggest, dank dungeons filled with desperate men. They were more akin to military barracks, functional, clean enough to prevent disease, and designed to house men who needed to maintain peak physical condition. The water for washing was provided fresh each morning, a practical necessity rather than luxury. A gladiator with an infected wound was a gladiator who couldn't fight, and a gladiator who couldn't fight was an expensive disappointment to his owner. Before any training, before breakfast, before the day truly began, there was this quiet hour of preparation. Bodies that might soon absorb tremendous punishment needed careful tending. A pulled muscle during morning exercises could mean the difference between victory and defeat when it mattered. Marcus, who had earned the arena name Thunder for his powerful voice during combat, spent exactly 14 minutes each morning on personal grooming, not from vanity, but from routine. Routine, he had discovered, was the anchor that kept a man's mind from drifting toward the darker possibilities that each new day might bring. Many gladiators developed morning rituals that went beyond the physical. Some prayed to Mars, god of war, others to Fortuna, goddess of luck. Some simply sat in silence, feeling their own heartbeat and breathing, reassuring themselves that they were, for this moment at least, alive. As the sun climbed higher, the school would gradually transform from a place of individual morning routines to a community preparing for another day of shared purpose. But for now, in these early moments, each man existed primarily with himself and his own thoughts. Even the smallest kindnesses took on greater meaning in a place where kindness could not always be afforded. The gladiator schools housed not monsters, but men who had learned to compartmentalize their capacity for violence with their need for human connection. Chapter 2: The Sacred Meal. Breakfast in a gladiator school was perhaps the most deceptively normal part of any day. Men who might face death before sunset sat together over porridge and discussed the weather, complained about sore muscles, and debated the merits of different sword techniques with the casual intensity of craftsmen discussing their tools. The food provided to gladiators was by Roman standards quite good, not because their owners were particularly compassionate, but because a well-fed gladiator was a gladiator who could train hard, recover quickly, and put on the kind of spectacular performance that drew crowds. The cooks who prepared these meals understood their responsibility. Rasmus the cook, who had once been Rasmus the mediocre gladiator before a shoulder injury ended his fighting career, took particular pride in ensuring that each portion contained enough protein to rebuild muscle and enough carbohydrates to fuel the intense training that lay ahead. Conversation at these morning meals tended toward the practical. Lucius might mention that his left knee was bothering him, information that Titus would file away, knowing that he might face Lucius in practice later and should adjust his attacks accordingly. But such tactical considerations were mixed freely with discussions of dreams, jokes about the peculiarities of various trainers, and gentle mockery of each other's sleeping habits. Even within the constraints of communal dining, small preferences could be expressed. Gaius always ate his bread first, claiming it helped his digestion. Marcus saved his bread for last, using it to soak up the remaining porridge. Such tiny rituals of personal choice took on outsized importance in lives where most decisions were made by others. The veteran gladiators often held court during these meals, sharing hard-won wisdom with newcomers, but their advice came wrapped in stories and casual observations rather than formal instruction. That Thracian fighter last month, old Sergius might say, he moved his shield just a fraction too wide on his third pass, cost him the match, but taught me something about timing. Cleanup was a shared responsibility, with no regard for arena status. The champion who had received thunderous applause the day before still needed to wipe down tables and sweep floors. This practical egalitarianism helped maintain the delicate social balance necessary in a place where men who lived together might soon be ordered to fight each other. As the meal wound down, the atmosphere would gradually shift from relaxed conversation to quiet preparation for the day's training. But the memory of shared food and easy companionship would remain, a reminder that even in their highly controlled world, moments of genuine human community were still possible. The dining hall, empty now except for the lingering warmth of shared presence, would wait quietly for the evening meal, when tired bodies and tested spirits would once again gather to break bread and remember that they were, despite everything, still fundamentally human. Chapter 3: The Gentle Art of Violence. Training began not with the clash of weapons, but with the quiet ritual of preparation. Equipment was inspected, muscles were gradually warmed, and minds were slowly focused on the precise demands of controlled violence. The weapons used in training were different from those used in actual combat, heavier in some cases, lighter in others, but always designed to build specific skills without causing the injuries that would prevent a gladiator from earning money for his school. Quintus the trainer had fought in the arena for 12 years before a spear thrust that permanently damaged his sword arm ended his combat career. But his knowledge of timing, distance, and the subtle psychology of fighting made him invaluable as an instructor. His teaching method was repetition, layered upon repetition, until correct technique became as automatic as breathing. Fighting, Quintus would often say, is not about being fast or strong, though those help. Fighting is about being consistent. The man who can perform the same technique correctly 1,000 times will defeat the man who knows 100 techniques but cannot rely on any of them. Practice combat looked almost nothing like the real thing. Movements were slowed down, techniques were isolated and repeated, and the focus was on precision rather than power. Partners worked together to help each other improve, knowing that the better skilled each man became, the higher quality their eventual real encounters would be. Much of training was solitary work against inanimate targets. The wooden posts, scarred from thousands of practice strikes, served as patient partners that never tired, never complained, and never struck back. Here, a gladiator could work on timing, accuracy, and the gradual building of muscle memory that would serve him when conscious thought became impossible. Physical conditioning was woven throughout the day, but always with the measured approach of athletes who needed to peak at specific times rather than exhaust themselves in training. A gladiator needed to be strong, flexible, and quick, but most importantly, he needed to be able to sustain his abilities throughout an entire day of games. Defense received as much attention as offense, if not more. A gladiator who died quickly was entertainment that ended too soon. The crowds wanted to see skill, endurance, and dramatic reversals of fortune. This meant that staying alive was often more valuable than winning quickly. Medical attention was immediate and thorough. Every minor injury was treated with the seriousness it deserved, because minor injuries had a way of becoming major problems when ignored. The school's medical staff understood that their job was preventive as much as corrective. Rest was scheduled as carefully as exercise. Bodies pushed to their limits needed time to rebuild, and minds focused on violence needed time to decompress. These rest periods were not signs of laziness, but essential components of a training regimen designed to produce peak performance when it mattered most. Advanced training involved scenario work that prepared gladiators for the unpredictable nature of arena combat. What if you were forced to fight left-handed? What if your opponent used an unfamiliar weapon? What if the arena surface was slippery with blood? Each possibility was explored methodically until adaptation became instinctive. As training concluded each day, there was a quiet satisfaction in the air, not the satisfaction of violence completed, but the deeper contentment of skills practiced, bodies strengthened, and another day of preparation added to the account that would be drawn upon when lives hung in the balance. Chapter 4: The Burden of Celebrity. Fame, for a gladiator, was a complicated gift. It meant better food, more comfortable accommodations, and the possibility of eventually earning enough money to purchase freedom. But it also meant becoming a public commodity, a person whose every action was subject to scrutiny and whose private moments became increasingly rare. Maximus had achieved what gladiators called name recognition, the point at which spectators would specifically ask for him in their match preferences. With this status came privileges, a private room, choice cuts of meat at meals, and the uncomfortable honor of being recognizable on the streets of Rome. Leaving the school for permitted excursions became exercises in public relations. Admirers wanted to touch his scars, hear stories of famous victories, and offer unsolicited advice about fighting techniques they had never attempted. The simple pleasure of anonymity became a luxury of the past. The attention came from all social classes, each with different expectations. Patrician ladies might send gifts, jewelry, expensive foods, perfumed oils, along with invitations that a slave, even a privileged one, could not safely accept or decline without careful consideration of the political implications. Correspondence became a significant part of a successful gladiator's routine. Letters arrived daily from admirers across the empire, and while responses were not required, maintaining good public relations was considered part of the job. Some fighters who could not write enlisted the help of educated slaves or retiring gladiators to help compose appropriate responses. The psychological burden of celebrity was rarely discussed openly, but it permeated everything. Each training session was now preparation, not just for survival, but for maintaining a reputation. Each upcoming match carried the weight of public expectation, and the fear of disappointing fans could become as paralyzing as the fear of death. Physical appearance took on new significance. Scars that might once have been simply evidence of survival became talking points, signatures of particular battles that fans would reference and expect to see. A gladiator's body was no longer entirely his own, but had become partially public property. Veteran status brought the expectation of leadership and wisdom. Successful gladiators were expected to mentor newcomers, provide guidance to struggling fighters, and serve as examples of proper behavior both in and out of the arena. The responsibility for other men's development added another layer of pressure to their daily lives. The internal dynamics of the gladiator school were complicated by fame. Successful fighters received better treatment, but this privilege had to be balanced against the need to maintain relationships with men who might be ordered to fight them. Jealousy and resentment were natural human responses that required careful management. Solitude, when it could be found, became precious beyond measure. The constant awareness of being watched, judged, and discussed made private moments of self reflection essential for maintaining mental balance. These stolen quiet minutes allowed for processing the contradictions of a life lived simultaneously in bondage and in the public eye. Sleep, for the famous gladiator, was often elusive. The mind that needed rest was the same mind that had learned to analyze every social interaction, every public moment, every training session for its potential impact on reputation and survival. The price of success was often the simple peace of unexamined rest. Chapter 5: The Peculiar Brotherhood. The relationships formed between gladiators were unlike any other human bonds. These were men who might be ordered to fight each other at any moment, yet who shared living quarters, meals, fears, and dreams with an intimacy that approached family. Friendship began with practical considerations. Gaius was particularly skilled at maintaining weapons and armor, while Marcus had a gift for treating minor injuries. Their skills complemented each other, and what began as mutual usefulness gradually deepened into genuine care and concern. Trust developed through countless small acts of assistance. In a world where a moment's inattention could mean serious injury, having someone watch your back during training became a profound expression of faith. These partnerships were built on the understanding that survival often depended on cooperation. As men came to trust each other with their physical safety, they also began to share their inner lives. Stories of families left behind, dreams of freedom, fears about aging and injury, the universal human experiences that transcended their unusual circumstances. The system occasionally demanded that friends fight each other. When such matches were announced, the emotional preparation began immediately. Both men understood that their friendship would have to be temporarily set aside in favor of professional obligation, but this understanding did not make the prospect less painful. The night before fighting a friend, the conversation was often the most honest of their relationship. Both men would acknowledge their respect for each other, discuss their hopes for the match, and sometimes make practical arrangements, Who should care for personal possessions if something went wrong? What messages should be sent to family members? After such matches, assuming both men survived, the friendship usually resumed with surprisingly little awkwardness. The ability to separate professional obligation from personal affection was a crucial skill for gladiators, and most developed it out of pure necessity. Education often passed between gladiators in informal ways. Men who had learned to read and write shared these skills with their illiterate brothers, understanding that knowledge was another tool that might someday prove useful for survival or advancement. The gladiator schools were melting pots of cultures, languages, and traditions. Men from across the empire found themselves living together, and many developed an appreciation for the diversity of human experience that few Romans of any social class would have encountered. Leadership within the gladiator community was organic rather than imposed. Men who showed wisdom, courage, and genuine concern for their brothers naturally became figures that others looked to for guidance and support. This internal social structure provided stability and meaning in lives that were otherwise largely controlled by others. The gladiator schools, despite their violent purpose, often functioned as genuine communities. Men who had lost their original families and homes found new forms of kinship with others who shared their unusual fate. These bonds provided emotional sustenance that made survival not just possible, but occasionally even meaningful. Chapter 6: The Weight of Tomorrow. The knowledge that any day might be your last creates a particular relationship with time. Gladiators learn to exist fully in the present while simultaneously making peace with an uncertain future, a psychological balancing act that required both acceptance and hope. Evening rituals took on special significance when morning might bring assignment to the games. Some men found comfort in writing, recording thoughts, memories, or messages that might serve as final words if necessary. Others focused on practical preparations, ensuring that weapons and armor were in perfect condition. Philosophical discussions were common in the evening hours. Questions about fate, duty, honor, and the meaning of life took on immediate practical relevance when your own existence was regularly put at risk for others' entertainment. These conversations were not abstract academic exercises, but urgent explorations of how to live well under extreme circumstances. Correspondence with the outside world required careful emotional management. Letters to family members had to balance honesty about his circumstances with reassurance about his well-being. Too much detail about the dangers might cause unnecessary pain. Too little might seem like he was forgetting his former life. Education was self-directed and practical. Men learned skills they thought they might need as free citizens: basic mathematics for business, additional languages for travel, crafts that could provide income. These learning activities represented investment in a future that was hoped for rather than guaranteed. Gift making and exchange created bonds that transcended their immediate circumstances. Small carved figures, braided leather bracelets, or simple poems became symbols of connection and mutual regard. These tokens were often a gladiator's most precious possessions. Psychological mentorship was as important as physical training. Veterans who had learned to maintain their mental health under extreme stress passed this knowledge to newer gladiators, understanding that survival required emotional resilience as much as physical skill. Sleep patterns varied greatly among gladiators. Some found that exhaustion from training provided natural rest, while others struggled with insomnia brought on by anxiety about upcoming matches. Those who couldn't sleep often developed productive ways to use these quiet night hours. Spiritual practices provided comfort and meaning that transcended their immediate circumstances. Whether through traditional Roman religious observances, prayers to gods from their homelands, or personal forms of meditation and reflection, gladiators found ways to connect with something larger than their daily struggles. The relationship with uncertainty became for many gladiators a form of wisdom. They learned to appreciate each day, not because it might be their last, but because it was the day they had been given. This perspective, born of necessity, often created a depth of appreciation for simple pleasures that free citizens rarely achieved. Chapter 7: The Mundane Moments of Survival. Between the dramatic moments of training and the life or death intensity of arena combat lay vast stretches of utterly ordinary time. Clothes needed washing, equipment required maintenance, meals needed preparation, and living spaces demanded cleaning, the endless small tasks that sustain any community. Mending clothes became a meditative practice for many gladiators. The repetitive motion of needle through fabric, the gradual repair of something damaged, the transformation of the torn into the whole. These simple acts provided both practical benefit and psychological metaphor. Craftwork filled many afternoon hours when training was complete, but evening had not yet arrived. Men discovered talents they never knew they possessed: woodworking, leathercraft, metalwork. These skills provided both practical value and the deep satisfaction of creating something lasting. Games and recreational activities served multiple purposes: entertainment, mental stimulation, and social bonding. The same strategic thinking that served gladiators in combat could be exercised safely through board games and contests of wit. Gambling with small stakes added excitement without serious consequence. Some gladiator schools maintained small gardens, both for practical food production and for the psychological benefits of nurturing growing things. Men who spent their professional lives focused on destruction often found profound satisfaction in activities that supported life and growth. Rest was not idleness, but an essential part of maintaining peak physical condition. The afternoon siesta was observed religiously, understanding that bodies pushed to their limits needed regular recovery time. These quiet hours allowed for both physical restoration and mental decompression. Medical care extended beyond treating injuries to maintaining general health. Preventive treatments, dietary supplements, and attention to minor ailments were all part of keeping valuable fighters in optimal condition. The school's medical staff understood that small problems left untreated could become major obstacles to performance. Storytelling was both entertainment and education. Veterans shared tales of memorable matches, narrow escapes, and lessons learned through experience. These stories served as informal training, passing on tactical knowledge and psychological insights that could not be taught through physical practice alone. Artistic pursuits flourished in the spaces between violence. Men discovered or rediscovered talents for music, visual arts, and literature. These activities provided outlets for emotional expression and intellectual stimulation that balanced the physical demands of their profession. Each ordinary day ended with the same mixture of satisfaction and uncertainty that had marked its beginning. Tasks completed, relationships maintained, bodies cared for, minds engaged. The daily work of staying human under inhuman circumstances was never finished, but it was always worthwhile. The Gladiators' school at night resembled nothing so much as a large family home, some members sleeping, others engaged in quiet personal activities, all sharing the same roof and the same uncertain future. In these peaceful moments, the extraordinary circumstances of their lives seemed almost normal. Chapter 8: The Morning After Games. The morning after games brought a peculiar mixture of relief, grief, and renewed uncertainty. Some men had fought and survived, others had fought and died, and still others had waited in preparation, only to have their matches postponed. Each outcome brought its own psychological challenges. Those who returned from successful matches carried more than just physical wounds. The psychological impact of life or death combat was cumulative, and each survival added both confidence and weight to a gladiator's mental burden. Victory was always accompanied by the knowledge that luck had played as large a role as skill. Medical treatment after games was immediate and comprehensive. Schools had too much invested in their fighters to risk losing them to preventable complications. But beyond treating physical injuries, the medical staff also understood the need to monitor for signs of psychological trauma that might affect future performance. The absence of those who had died was handled with quiet respect. Their belongings were carefully preserved and distributed according to their wishes or given to surviving friends. The empty spaces they left behind served as reminders of the ultimate stakes of their profession. Processing the events of game days happened communally. Men who had witnessed death needed to talk through what they had seen, while those who had fought needed to process their experiences with others who could understand. These conversations were essential for maintaining psychological health, and correspondence after games carried special weight. Letters to families of deceased fighters required delicate balance between honesty and comfort. Messages to one's own family needed to convey survival without dwelling on the dangers faced or the friends lost. Meals after games were subdued affairs. The empty places at table served as constant reminders of the day's losses. But the survivors also felt the particular intensity of appetite and taste that comes with having faced death and lived to eat another meal. Sleep after games was either the deep rest of exhaustion or the restless wakeness of minds that had been pushed beyond normal limits. Both responses were natural, and the school had learned to accommodate the different ways that men processed extreme experiences. And so the cycle began again. Another dawn, another day of training, eating, laughing, worrying, hoping, and preparing. The morning after games was also the morning before the next games, and gladiators had learned to find peace in this endless rhythm of preparation and survival. The sun rose on men who had learned to live fully in the space between certainty and catastrophe, finding humanity in the midst of inhumanity, and discovering that even the most extraordinary circumstances were, in the end, made up of ordinary moments that required the same patience, kindness, and courage that all human life demands. Thank you for joining us on this quiet exploration of lives lived between the dramatic moments that history remembers. The gladiators of Rome were neither the noble heroes nor the bloodthirsty monsters that popular imagination sometimes creates, but simply human beings finding ways to survive, connect, and maintain dignity under extraordinary circumstances. Their daily routines of training, eating, resting, and worrying remind us that even the most unusual lives are built from the same fundamental human needs and activities that shape all our days. In their patience with uncertainty, their care for each other, and their determination to find meaning in difficult circumstances, they offer lessons that remain relevant across the centuries. Sleep well, dear viewers. Tomorrow, like every day, will bring its own mixture of ordinary moments and extraordinary possibilities. Do not forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more relaxing and sleep-inducing contents on this channel.